SaharaTV, you're welcome back. At this point, we are bringing you updates, that's editorial updates from election 2015. And with me in the studio is my colleague and editor for Sahara Reporters, Declan Galvin. You're welcome, Declan.
Well, thank you, Kwesi.
Okay, so what's happening in Nigeria at this point?
So we wanted to provide some of the most recent updates from the news and then also mention some of the stories that we're going to continue to be monitoring throughout the day. One of the big headlines that we're looking at is that Buhari seems to be beating Jonathan in both Asarok and then in Abuja more general. Fayose has delivered at least 14 local governing authorities for PDP, something Sahara Reporters announced today. And of course, those are unofficial results because INEC hasn't verified these results yet. ECOWAS has commended Nigerians and Nigeria in general for the conduct during their elections. And I actually think that one of the biggest stories that we should be talking about in the media is that the election has mostly been smooth. And so we find that while there have been problems in River State, and we wouldn't want to take away from that, and other local problems, the doomsday scenarios that so many people were announcing and talking about in the media and fearful of seem to, at least at this point, not taken place. And of course, we don't want that to happen. So the election has been mostly smooth.
Yep.
The TMG, the Transition Monitoring Group, which is doing parallel vote counting and making sure that that there's a check in terms of vote collation. They said that 4% of polls are still voting today. And so if we remember yesterday, one of the headlines was that there was an extension on some polls.
Yep.
TMG is reporting that it's only 4% across the country. And I think that that's something else to mention. Yeah. Another lead story is that David Mark seems to be behind his APC opponent in Benue. And of course, not all the polls are in yet, and the votes have not all been collated. But that's something that we'll be monitoring throughout the day. Last, Nigerian troops have been fighting Boko Haram terrorists in Bauchi State, and so that happened as early as Sunday morning Nigerian time.
Okay, so I'd like us to look a little bit more in detail at all these stories that you. Let's start with President Jonathan lagging behind in Asarok. There are 2 polling units in Asarok, as I understand, and he seems to be lagging behind in both polling units. Is that a strong signal that something is not going right for the PDP, you think?
You know, it's hard to say, certainly because you would assume most people living within the proximity of the capital would have some kind of financial or economic ties to the operation of the government. So you usually find in elections elsewhere that their voting patterns usually model the incumbency because of those ties. But I'm not so sure if we should go as far as to say that that's the case here. I just wouldn't want to offer that kind of speculation. But certainly, if he's behind a lot in polls across this particular region, that's something we should be concerned about, because this is a region that observers are paying attention to in terms of who will eventually win and when we could project a winner.
Okay, it's also instructive to note that the president actually voted in Otuoke, which is his hometown, rather than in Asarok, which is where he lives. So maybe that, you know, just like you said, we probably don't have to read too much into that yet. Fayose, he delivers. What exactly do you mean when you say he delivers these seats?
It seems that the unconfirmed results from polls are that PDP has taken the lead in most of the polls, at least 14, according to Sahara Reporters news article today, 16 LGAs and in some other media houses. On the one hand, it's a little bit surprising given the amount of emphasis the media has paid toward Akiti Gate and the revelation that Governor Fayose is deeply implicated in rigging his gubernatorial election last year. But if we follow the news over this past week, we've seen that Fayose has ordered a stronger police presence and to begin restricting movements of people. And so this is something that Sahara has reported on extensively this week. And so the fact that that PDP has pulled ahead in those polls isn't altogether surprising if you look at it from that vantage point.
So let me ask a follow-up on that. The whole federal system and how it works, where you could have, say, a PDP governor, and then whoever like responds to a federal boss in that sense. What kind of tensions are these likely to create in places which are like already flashpoints, where they have like, say, an APC governor, and they're dealing with the federal boss who's like
exactly.
from the PDP?
So on the one hand, there could be a great deal of tension. But if we find that economic and financial interests begin aligned, perhaps there would be more cooperation. But I wouldn't say that that's going to be the case. Fayose is a very inflammatory individual. He has been probably one of the most belligerent of the speakers from PDP. He was leading the charge, and that Buhari's trip to London was because of medical treatment. That was completely unfounded. So he's not the easiest person to get along with. So if we find that APC candidates begin winning locally there, and he is the PDP governor, you could surmise that at best they would need to work out some issues, and that perhaps there would be some tension. I think that's fair.
Great response. ECOWAS congratulates Nigerians. Well deserved, if you ask me.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people in the media were bracing themselves for a lot of bad news, for even more card reader failure. There are allegations of rigging throughout the country, but it doesn't seem like it was that doomsday scenario that so many people were trying to paint. And again, I want to reference that TMG number. They're saying that 4% of Poles are voting today, which I mean that for me is quite successful. And I think ECOWAS really wanted to nod to that. Because so many times, particularly in international media, it's just looking at the negatives, but there's a lot of positives, and a lot of reports were coming into Sahara Reporters from citizen journalists, and they were saying the operation was smooth. I feel like my vote was counted, and people were feeling good about this.
So if the figure is just at 4%, even if an issue comes up, because yesterday we were talking about instances where people might think there was some form of compromise overnight as we waited for the vote counting to resume. Even if we were to take that into consideration, and I'm painting a hypothetical scenario right here, would that be enough to make a candidate win or lose?
So kind of explain your hypothetical situation.
The 4%, let's say a scenario came up where people are like, oh, there was some kind of a compromise overnight. So the 4% is in some kind of a lingo right there. Right. So let's leave this 4% by the side and concentrate on the rest of the poll. Is that 4% enough to make any heavy impact? So
the first thing I'll say is ultimately that's best put to INEC. But in terms of looking at it from an analytical standpoint, I'm not sure that those 4% of polls would, in of themselves, sway the election from one candidate to the other. That probably wouldn't be the case. But INEC will ultimately kind of make that determination.
Okay, we're getting ready to round up, but two quick ones. David Mark seemed to be lagging behind in his native Benue. However, Shore, when we just spoke with Shore a while ago, made it emphatic that he's not losing. I think he lost heavily in one particular unit. Yeah. But that does not equate to losing the entire. Is this accurate?
Yeah, I believe that's accurate, and that's why. So he hasn't lost, right? So for a couple of reasons, not all the votes have been in, and then INEC has also not declared anything. Yeah. But in some of them, he is lagging behind, but that doesn't mean he's losing. That doesn't mean he's lost. It just means that he hasn't had early on as strong as a performance as one would suggest of somebody with that amount of influence within PDP.
Okay, and then finally, Nigerian troops took on Boko Haram. Boko Haram has not been as active as a lot of people thought they would be. They've not been as active as they themselves threatened to be. What's the situation with Boko Haram? Any updates from anything else that they might have done apart from the few instances?
We are monitoring that. The biggest news with Boko Haram is what's happening in Bauchi State. Which is the we have fighting between Boko Haram terrorists and Nigerian military there as early as Sunday morning, and details forthcoming.
Okay, would you know if the AU troops are still on the ground?
Certainly African Union and joint military troops are involved. Specifically whether they're in Bauchi State is something I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much, Declan, and
Thank you.
we will definitely be reverting to you for more updates as we continue to cover this election. Thanks a lot, and we will be right back with more SaharaTV. Stay tuned.